The story of Constantine Porphyrogenitos, the 51st Byzantine emperor, is among the most remarkable in all of Eastern Roman history. Born in 905, his father died when he was but 7, forcing the boy down a long and lonely road. More than 3 decades would pass before he could claim his throne in full. Initially he suffered under the misrule of his drunken uncle. Then he was tossed about in the power struggles of the capital, passing from one regent to the next. Finally, in 920, the last of these regents declared himself emperor. Constantine kept the title of co-emperor, but he was powerless, a puppet on the throne. In the cutthroat world of court intrigue, few doubted that young Constantine would not last long in the shadow of the usurper. Yet in spite of all that, he survived. Luckily for him, Constantine's usurper, Romanus Lecapenus, had been a merciful man, who much preferred clemency to cruelty. The young emperor was also strangely popular, far more popular than his usurper, which reflected in part the growing prestige of the Macedonian dynasty. After a reign of 24 years, Romanus restored Constantine, an act that was not just generous, but far-sighted too, for Constantine quickly emerged as a capable and even-handed ruler. The early years of Constantine's life have already been covered on this channel in 2 prior videos, so make sure to check them out. This one will follow his life from 944 onwards, when he reigned supreme and ruled as the one and only Vasilevs ke Autokrator, emperor and autocrat. By 945, Constantine Porphyrogenitos had done away with the remainder of his rivals and had a firm grip on all the levers of power. But now that supreme power was his, would he use it well? After a life spent in the shadows of power, the emperor had no actual experience of ruling, but he was intelligent and had a brilliant example of how to rule well in the form of Romanus Lecapenus. And throughout the final decade and a half of Constantine's reign, the successes of the past were built upon, while simultaneously clearing the way for future triumphs. Military pressure on the Muslims continued to varying degrees of success. In his wars against them, Constantine turned to the Phocas family to lead his armies. They were a powerful aristocratic clan who had suffered under the reign of Romanus Lecapenus, so they made natural allies for Constantine. Bardas Phocas was appointed commander-in-chief for the east, while the Anatolikon and Cappadocian themes were put under the command of his sons, Nicephorus and Leo respectively. The need for capable commanders in the east was pressing, as in 945 the city of Aleppo came under the rule of a powerful new emir known as Saif al-Dawla, the sword of the dynasty. Saif's first raid against the empire was a trifling affair, ending with a diplomatic mission to Constantinople and a prisoner exchange in 946. But after a 2-year lull in the fighting, things soon hotted up. Raids and counter-raids carried on, culminating in an attack that led Saif across the Halys River into central Anatolia. It was 950, and Saif al-Dawla had picked his moment well. The year previously, Emperor Constantine had launched an invasion to retake the island of Crete. Just like the last ill-fated attempt in 911, the campaign ended in disaster. Saif hoped to capitalise on the confusion, and initially things went well, but upon his return he was ambushed by Leo Phocas and severely defeated. It was a good day for Byzantine arms, but Saif remained defiant. Imperial offers of peace were stubbornly rejected, and the emir got his own back in 953 when he won a great victory over Bardas Phocas, capturing the town of Marash in the process. Further defeats convinced Emperor Constantine to shake things up, so Bardas was dismissed and replaced with his son Nicephorus as commander-in-chief in the east. Nicephorus quickly proved his worth and turned the tide decisively against Saif al-Dawla. In 957 he captured the critical stronghold of Adata, while in 958 his deputy, a certain John Tzimiskes, stormed Samosata, bringing another important town into the imperial fold. The tide continued to turn decisively against Saif al-Dawla, but the climax of this crashing wave of Byzantine victories must await the next video. While warfare continued against the Muslims of Syria and Crete, peace reigned elsewhere. The peace with Bulgaria that Romanus Lecapenus had established in 927 still held good. Constantine and the Tsar of Bulgaria were calm, amiable figures, so the long peace grew longer still. Both sides benefited, but the Byzantines benefited from it more due to the successes that it enabled them to achieve in the east. By the time the peace ended in the 960s, the empire was well placed to crush Bulgaria. In Italy as well, the Byzantine outposts there were calm, aside from the occasional Muslim raid. But that calm was not matched elsewhere across the peninsula. A succession of weak Italian kings had slowly been losing their grip on the country. In 924 they lost the title of Holy Roman Emperor. There was simply no Italian ruler powerful enough to force their claim, and so the title fell into abeyance. The papacy had fallen into the hands of grasping aristocratic clans in Rome, while King Berengar II of Italy felt threatened by a rising star north of the Alps. That star was Otto the Saxon, the German king who would one day invade Italy and declare himself Roman Emperor. By 949, Otto's coronation was still 13 years away, but Berengar felt threatened nonetheless. We do not actually know why King Berengar decided to send a diplomatic mission to Byzantium. In all likelihood, the attempt was a mixture of trying to win powerful friends while also dissuading friendly relations between the Byzantines and King Otto. In any case, the emissary he sent was called Liutprand of Cremona, and his account of his travels survives to this day as perhaps the most vivid portrait of the Eastern imperial capital. In his writings, many of the city's marvels are breathlessly described. We are told of Byzantium's technical works, of how Constantine's hydraulic throne was able to raise itself high in the air, towering over the diplomat and forcing the two men to talk through an intermediary, of how mechanical lions roared and golden birds sung in the palace of the emperors. By the middle of the 9th century, Constantinople's population had been rising steadily for decades, and was in the hundreds of thousands. Certainly, Liutprand would never have seen anything like it, not even in the ruins of Rome. Alas, nothing came of his mission, and King Berengar was swatted aside by Otto in 961, but Liutprand's account makes it all worthwhile. Domestically, Constantine continued the policies of his predecessor, namely by attempting to stop the spread of aristocratic estates across Anatolia. In the countryside, nobles tried to buy up the land of their poorer neighbours, keeping them on as tenants or displacing them. The strength of the imperial army depended on a healthy class of farmers, so in 947 he ordered all aristocrats who had bought land off peasants since 944 to return it without compensation. On top of that, any lands which a soldier relied upon to equip himself could not be sold or given away. His attempts to improve the condition of the landed peasantry were admirable, and probably succeeded to an extent, but the spread of the aristocracy continued to menace the peasants, and would crop up time and time again. The final years of Constantine's life were dogged by controversy over his legitimacy. If you cast your mind back several videos, Constantine was the product of his father's fourth marriage. Fourth marriages were illegal in Eastern Orthodoxy, so it had left a shadow over his legitimacy. Nevertheless, most people had moved on, until Patriarch Polyectus of Constantinople brought up the issue again. The emperor grew tired of his patriarch's meddling, and so he sought the advice of clergymen in Asia on how to get rid of him in 959. Alas, the journey proved too much. Although he had long left his childish sickliness behind, the emperor had grown fat with age. He was not in a good way, and a fever soon took hold. First he went to a hot spring to relieve his pains, then to a holy monastery. Neither worked, and it quickly became clear that the 54-year-old emperor was mortally ill. He returned to the capital, dying there on the 9th of November 959. Constantine was succeeded by his only son, Romanus II Porphyrogenitos, peacefully and without challenge. After a life as uncertain as Constantine's had been, the serenity of his succession was well earned. Although he only truly ruled for 15 of the 46 years for which he supposedly reigned, Constantine Porphyrogenitos did his part for Byzantium's resurgence, providing it with stable and competent governance. his generals began to deliver success after success in the eternal struggle with the Arabs. And just a few years after his death, the Byzantines would score some of their greatest victories. But those same victories served not just the glory of the empire, but of its generals too. Some of these generals, using wars as springboards, decided that the sky was the limit and set their sights on ultimate power. It was in the shadow of these men that the final imperial triumph took shape. For good or ill, the age of the warrior emperors was at hand. Many thanks to this channel's generous consul tier member, Chris Manger.